I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is The Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do.
Hi, I'm Steve.
Hello, I'm Cara.
And today on the Innkeepers podcast, we have the opportunity to interview Sandi Bradford, who is the Executive Director with Barnabas International. And you know, our family, when we served overseas in the 90s, we were first acquainted with Barnabas and their ministry of encouragement and counseling and shepherding. Really, shepherding is their key word, but they're shepherding of missionaries in cross-cultural settings. Anyway, we were very encouraged by them and their ministry. And I know you're very well acquainted with Barnabas also.
Yeah, I actually, when I was in college down at Biola University, I had the opportunity to be a part of Mukapa, and that is a ministry that has come out of Barnabas International. And also later, when I was already a counselor, I got to work with their transition seminars we had a seminar that they started up in Seattle area, so I got to do that for about 4 or 5 years. And it's just really exciting to me, all the different ways that they have been a blessing to families. And I am so grateful we get to hear from Perry. So Perry and Sandi Bradford began their missionary journey in 1980 with Wycliffe Bible Translators, and then in 1994 they returned to the United States after 10 years of service in Papua New Guinea, and at that time they joined Barnabas International. Perry currently serves as the Executive Director of Barnabas, and for 17 years, Sandi, his wife, has served as the Director of Women's Ministry for Calvary Community Church in Williams Bay, Wisconsin. Together, Perry and Sandi have a heart to shepherd missionaries and the national church leaders around the globe. And they are proud parents of 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren. So we hope you enjoy our conversation with Perry today.
Yeah, well, let's get to it.
Hello, Perry. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate the invitation. It's good to be with you guys.
So can you share with us a little bit about what Barnabas International does?
Yeah, Barnabas is a pastoral care ministry to global workers around the world. Began back in 1986 with our founder, LaRue and Evie Lindquist, who were local church pastors at a large evangelical free church in Rockford. And they were actually visiting one of their missionaries on the field, doing a kind of a pastoral visit to a missionary in Colombia, South America. And were challenged by that actual missionary couple to consider a ministry of encouragement to global workers around the world. The need for just someone to come and provide some level of presence, if you will, to a worker on the field. And so LaRue and Evie prayed, asked the Lord, what they should do, and began the ministry very small, just the 2 of them traveling around the world, working out of a small office in Rockford, providing encouragement, enrichment, edification to missionaries and national church leaders that they came in contact with. Kind of interesting to think back to the history of how this thing all started, and that when LaRue and Evie wanted to move into this ministry, they began to consult with larger organizations, organizations like Wycliffe, Ethnos 360, which was New Tribes at that point, Greater Europe Mission, and LaRue from his pastoral ministry had contact with some of the top levels of leaders in those organizations. And so each of those agencies, single mission organizations, actually wanted LaRue and Evie to start a missionary care ministry in their organizations. And so they thought the need was great. They found out that it was an important void in ministry where someone could come and provide a pastoral presence to workers. And so they decided to start their own 501c3, build a broader base of ministry, and just began to network and travel, providing on-site care to missionaries and those that they serve. And so from that, here we are some 35 years later with the same vision of providing pastoral care. That really is our niche. We do have mental health specialists and all kinds of member care specialists within the organization as these years have gone on. But at the same time, our real core value of shepherding the hearts of global workers is really what we're all about. And so we really seek to lead them to the chief shepherd. We have some of our core values of we're Christ-centered people. We are grace-filled in how we deliver our ministry. We take them to the Word, and we just try to come alongside them and shepherd their hearts toward Christ. And we obviously have lots to talk more about how we do that, but it's been fascinating to see God's hand on the work over the years. So in a nutshell, we're pastors who care for global workers and their hearts and soul care.
Joining one of the specific organizations, it sounds like you guys are able to provide care for a broad range of workers all over the world and not just tied to one agency.
Yeah, certainly that's the case. I think right now we're up to serving about 180 different mission agencies that we actually have access to. Some at much more deeper relationships. Some are strategic partnerships that we would have with them. Others are informal relationships just through the grassroots worker on the field that our staff member might have contact with. But yeah, that vision that LaRue and Evie believed in to kind of set a broader base has played well for us as an organization. It's not without its challenges to try to meet many of the needs that are out there. And so, we have to be cautious and careful about, who and where we begin to work and all those kinds of things, but to keep our capacity with our workers. But it has been neat to see. I mean, God's allowed us to reach thousands and thousands of workers and continue to do so through deep personal relationships with, on the ground workers. And so we are people that hop on airplanes and travel to these locations. Can't even estimate the millions of miles that our people have traveled over the years. How many, million milers we have in the organization because of their mileage programs and stuff with the travels. But it is that ministry of presence of actually being in the homes of those workers is really our bread and butter still.
Is Barnabas unique in the world of missionary care? Are there other organizations that do something like what you do?
I would say, there are more and more that are growing in the area of soul care. I think originally when member care began, of course, back 35 years ago, there was really nothing on the radar screen as far as member care was concerned. Organizations were wanting it, they were needing it. And so LaRue and his wife were kind of cutting edge back then to really look to develop a pastoral style of ministry with workers. But I think since that time, we have seen other organizations who have the same heartbeat to come and do ministry more from a pastoral focus rather than from a mental health focus. We've tried to mesh those worlds, and that we do have mental health professionals in the organization. But really, we come from a shepherding theology. That is really our foundation. And so I wouldn't say at this stage in member care we're unique. I think in the early days, the first 20, 25 years of ministry, that would have been the case. But now I think you're going to see a lot more organizations who have more of this heart-to-heart care, I suppose, rather than some sort of specialist or specialty type of care that is out there. And as you guys know, member care has evolved over the last 30 years
For sure.
in many different ways. And but we've tried to stay true to our calling of being shepherds to global workers. And of course, that affects our recruiting, that affects the people that we bring into the organization, it affects how we seek to deliver ministry, where we seek to lead people as we come alongside them to provide care. And so I suppose in that way, it's unique, but we do follow the biblical mandate of being shepherds and leading people to the chief shepherd. With that. So
Thank you for that ministry. When you look at kind of the realm of global workers, where you have families, you have singles, couples, families, you have people in restricted access countries, you've got children transitioning back to the States for college, and as well as when they're on the field. Can you just kind of talk about some of the range of care that Barnabas has provided?
Yeah, thanks. I think I try to refer to it as we've tried to offer a lot of different platforms of ministries, or maybe you would use the terminology models of ministry that are out there. When we had in the early days, when some of our staff members were traveling and getting into the homes of global workers, we would ask the questions, what is it that you need, and how can we help you in your spiritual and emotional care of your lives? And at that point, they started to say, well, you can help our kids. One way you can help us as parents is to help us with our kids. And so at that point, Barnabas responded to try to develop a ministry specifically to missionary kids. And so we developed an organization, or kind of really not an organization, it's more of a ministry within Barnabas called Mukapa. And it's a college age ministry related specifically to kids transitioning back to the United States. And so from that, ministries were developed, transition seminars, retreats for MKs on college campuses, a network, if you will, that has been built to support that particular age demographic of student who was transitioning back to the United States. And in that way, we were able to assist the family in developing some programs and unique opportunities for them. I think we've tried to respond to needs as we see them. Of course, we can't respond everywhere. About 5-6 years ago, we were asked to try to consider providing care to BAM workers, businesses mission folks. And so unique set of circumstances and how they do ministry. They said they needed an HR specialist. That would have been the language that they would have used in their demographic. And so we were able to come along and provide some level of care through a network to some BAM workers who were working in some restricted access countries. One of our goals right now is to, because of the growth of member care around the world, you asked the question about what is your niche as an organization. And so how do we maintain that niche when there are so many opportunities and resources out there that are available? And so we're really striving to set some goals for the future related to what are the regions and the areas of the world, or even the people groups of the world, that don't have access to any kind of spiritual and emotional care, and what can we do to try to invade those areas and to bring our skill and our expertise into those networks or those regions. And so that would be least reach people groups, typically working with national workers, national leaders, which was part of our original vision as an organization. We're going to continue to work with Western workers, no doubt about that. But how might God open up doors for us to be partnering with some of these national entities and national leaders around the world that could really use some care, that they don't get it, or they don't have the training or the resources available to them to actually even establish any structures of care within their midst. So we've sought over the years to try to respond to various needs. There was training that seemed like was being asked for. So Barnabas has been involved in a conference every year where we train member care workers from a pastoral perspective.
Uh-huh.
And so every October we have a pastoral training and member care conference that we offer in North Carolina. And that's a place where we can dive deep into the Word, unpack some theology related to shepherding, and then provide some tools to member care workers, whether from the agencies or from churches, who can come in and actually begin to be better equipped to provide care to the workers that they send out. And so, yeah, I guess, Steve, I'd say we've sought to try to find those niches where we can, and we've been able to offer some really interesting kind of respite retreats around the world. We've had single retreats, we've had marriage retreats, depending on the situation, the circumstances, the region of the world, the need. And we've been able to kind of have our staff who are trained in those areas respond to those various needs. Don't think I would say they're programmatic in nature. They're more relationally designed so that they can fulfill kind of one of our core values is to try to build long-term relationships with global workers on the field. So we can go in and we can do a 5-day spiritual life retreat or a gathering of workers, but the sole purpose there would be to build a baseline relationship so that we can track with those people long term and come alongside them for the long haul and provide a ministry of shepherding to them. So I don't know if that answers fully, but that's a little bit of kind of how we've seen some of this stuff play out a bit.
Clear that you guys have a lot of your fingers in a lot of different things all over, and your different workers within your ministry have different niches. So, but to hear
they're very special. Yeah, they're very specialized, trained in different areas. They each have interesting focuses on what they bring to us, which is if you get a staff member that comes in who has an expertise in a specific area, you want to try to see how you can maximize that in the area of pastoral care along the way. And I know you're familiar with the transition seminars.
Yes, I am. I enjoyed being part of the team for a while.
Yeah. Now, you were involved in Seattle, weren't you, for a while?
Yeah, I was for about 3 or 4 years. As long as that program ran, I was
right.
part of it.
Yeah.
It was it was amazing to watch how God used that season with those MKs coming off the field.
My wife and I were involved in that for 19 years. We saw about 2,500 MKs come back through that program over the 19 years that we were involved in it, and they were rich experiences for those TCKs, and but also now to be able to have those relationships long term with some of those kids at that point now have families and they have their own children. Some of them on the field, some of them in business, some of them in government, wherever they're involved. So it's been pretty special to be a part of that. So
what would you say Barnabas is currently doing to expand your influence? And COVID-19 has probably affected some things, and maybe you guys have had to regroup a little bit.
Everybody's had to pivot, haven't we, in leadership to try to figure out how to do ministry in this kind of crazy day and age. And right at the beginning of COVID, we were embarking on a new training venture with Barnabas called Shepherd's Apprentice. When I became director back in 2008, one of the questions my mentors would ask me as I was coming into leadership was, they actually asked this question, about 3 or 4 of them at different occasions. If Perry, have you ever thought, if Satan wanted to bring down Barnabas, what attacks would he have? How would he do that? Mm-hmm. And they actually, how have you thought about that as you go into leadership? And actually had to kind of say, actually, no, that's not a question I've actually considered. And they all encouraged me, well, you better consider that question, with things. And so as I thought about that and prayed over it, certainly I felt like, wow, I think he would attack our own people. He would attack internally more than externally. And so we began to look internally a little bit more closely about how we were doing spiritually and emotionally as caregivers.
Yeah.
And what we found out is we weren't as healthy as we thought we were. And so we then set out on a trajectory to say, man, if we believe in shepherding and we believe in pastoral care, we need to provide that for our own people. And we need to provide a high level of care for our personnel, because they can only give out what they have been receiving from Christ on a day-to-day basis. And so we developed an in-house shepherding training. And we took all of our staff through this training. It took us a year or two to develop it. It took us about 3 or 4 years to actually get all of our staff trained and equipped in the theology of shepherding. And it was a fascinating experience. And so as now we've come kind of full circle with that, and our staff are caring for workers based on the biblical theology of shepherding, we have felt like that is something that we can offer to the member care world as well. And so we had designed a program that was going to be a kind of a 2-week in-house where everybody would get together, and then we would track with people for about 3 to 6 months and follow up with them in the area of member care. COVID hit, and we had to redesign it to go virtual. So this past year, we've actually been redeveloping that whole training into a virtual platform. And right now we have our first pilot training taking place with 26 of our own personnel. And Lord willing, we hope to be able to offer this coming year some of that training then to global workers who are involved in member care outside of Barnabas. And so it's a really grassroots training related to shepherd care. And it's taking us about 8 to 12 months to actually deliver the training in the virtual setting. If we ever get back to meeting in person, we'll probably go back to some in-person stuff to where we can actually do it in a different format. But we're excited about that. It's involves a good number of our staff right now as potential facilitators coming out. And so as we begin to be able to roll this out, we'll be getting more information out to the member care world of how they can sign up and what they can do to be a part of it and stuff. But
that sounds pretty intriguing from our standpoint, being better equipped to care for the missionaries that come through our facility out here. So, yeah,
I mean, it really is during this whole process, just to kind of let you in on it a bit more, we dove into a Trinitarian theology as well. So this is all coming from a very Trinitarian based theologically. And then we tried to put that into practice, and how do we actually deliver that that kind of care to the people that ourselves, first of all, and then to the people that we're caring for, as he relates to the Father in that whole process. So it was an interesting journey. The staff member that's heading that up is Darlene Jerome. She was formerly with Mobile Member Care Team, her and Karen. So they've been part of our staff for quite a while. And Darlene is an amazing trainer. And she has helped us facilitate that by pulling together a team of people to actually develop that program and then begin to assimilate it out to the member care world.
Yes, I know Darlene Jerome well, and I have an incredible respect for her and her work. And I'm excited to see what you guys come up with.
Thanks. She's very focused right now on this particular training that we're providing. So it's been great.
So I know, speaking of journeys, your journey began with CrossCultural Ministry. And so talk to us just a little, walk us through a little bit of that. You serving overseas and then ending up where you're sitting today.
Yeah, thanks. Actually felt the call of the Lord on my life at the age of 13 to get involved in missions. It was at a missions conference at the church I grew up in northern Kentucky. And my parents would always have missionaries into their home. They were good examples for me, even in my ministry now, of taking missionaries into the house and living with them and giving them opportunity to share their stories. And so I heard lots of missionary stories growing up. And so really felt the call of God on my life at age 13. And from that age on, was mentored by a number of different people through high school and into college. Went on to Moody Bible Institute, where I met my wife. Was trained in Christian education, knowing full well I wanted to get involved with MKs overseas in education. We were looking at a couple of mission agencies. We were looking to potentially go to Africa with SIM, and then we happened to meet Uncle Cam Townsend with Wycliffe, the founder of Wycliffe. Happened to be actually an uncle to a neighbor in our area where we lived. So we would sit down at a picnic table and talk to Uncle Cam about global missions. And of course, he was a pretty good recruiter into missions. And so he said, there's a place for you in Wycliffe. And so we joined Wycliffe in 1980, my wife and I, Sandi, and headed to the field to do work with missionary kids as a teacher. And so I have my education background in elementary education. So we spent a couple of years in Southwest Texas in a one-room schoolhouse with a missionary training program with Wycliffe in the early days. And then it was in 1984 that we transitioned to Papua New Guinea, where I taught in the local MK school there with Wycliffe up in the mountains of PNG. And we spent 10 years there. My wife was involved in physical therapy in the clinic in the medical field. And I became the principal of that school pretty early in our move there. And so our 10 years there was wonderful, and I thought we'd always live and die in PNG, one of these career people on the field as a cross-cultural worker. But the Lord had other plans for us, and we moved back to the United States in 1994. And at that point, Barnabas contacted us. They were an organization of about 5 couples, and they really wanted to grow the organization. And through a number of circumstances, the Lord led us here, never dreaming we'd ever be involved in missionary care at that point. So I came in as the associate director under the founder to assist him in growing the organization with my administrative gifts and my background in personnel and those kinds of things. And so I worked with LaRue for a number of years, and then we had 2 other directors come in that I worked for and supported them in their efforts as leadership. And then in 2008, the board of directors asked me to step in and take the executive director's role. So I've been in this role now for, 12 years or so, something like that, as the executive director for the organization. So yeah, we've been with Barnabas a long time, 94, when you're a cross-cultural worker and you're coming home and you're in transition. We just debriefed a young couple who are transitioning from India. We've been meeting with them via Zoom every couple of weeks, and they're in a transition of ministry right now as well. And you just don't know what the Lord has for you. And as you know, probably even through your ministry, there's just so many displaced workers right now who are dealing with all kinds of things related to their transition. So we were grateful that Wycliffe and Barnabas were friends, and there was a way for us to mesh our lives together. And that was obviously God's ordained movement in our life. But we've loved our years with Barnabas and are grateful for what God's opened up for us globally in the area of service. So it's been good. It's been a good journey.
So as you have worked with Barnabas all these years, can you share with us what are some of the perennial issues that you and the team see with the missionaries that you care for?
Yeah, there's all kinds of issues out there, isn't there, in the area of care that we see. I think probably the greatest thing that we have seen over the years is really just, I guess I would call it spiritual fatigue, where workers are the spiritual dryness that you see in workers, even though they're on the front lines of ministry and are actively engaged in their callings, somehow along the way and along the journey, they lose that intimate relationship with Christ. based on the need to produce or the need to, further God's kingdom. Those are all good things,
Yeah.
but at the same time, just the lacking of their own interpersonal relationships with Christ, we have seen to be a significant issue on the field and continue to be. And certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, the added pressures of the pandemic, the displacement of people from the field, lack of closure with people who have not been able to have a quality closure to their experience. National workers who are left alone and not fully equipped to do the work maybe that God's called them to do. All these things can add up to kind of this despair, if you will, related to your own spiritual life and your spiritual journey. And that then we find, I'm a personal believer in that our emotional and our spiritual lives are pretty well connected.
Yeah.
And so we can see some of the fallout, if you will, on the emotional side, due to the fact that the spiritual dryness continues to creep in. And so part of our goal in Barnabas is to bring the life of Christ back, into people's lives, to let them be able, like you, pause, stop, consider who Jesus really is to them, rather than, trying to be so product oriented in our approach to life and ministry, that there is a lot that we can receive from the Father in the midst of it, and not to neglect that along the way. I think probably the need for debriefing is huge right now, in the field of care. A place for people to tell their safe story without being judged or without being criticized, but just to be able to open up their hearts to other people. And I don't know all the trends in missions. I try to keep my eyes on it at some level, but there does seem to be a changing of the guard as far as generational shifts in missions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, ministering to millennials, the new generation that's coming up, incredibly fascinating models of ministries that are being developed, less new ministries that are just church planning, traditional styles of ministries that are out there that now are meeting real felt needs on the field. And how can we come alongside those folks in a way that's going to allow Christ to become the preeminent force in their lives, rather than I just got to live out this passion and vision and just, change the world. I mean, we were all that way when we started in missions.
Yeah.
Those of us who've been around a while know that that's necessary and needed. But without the sustaining power and grace of God on a day-to-day basis, they're going to burn out and they're going to come home. And so our desire is to try to strengthen them in the midst of all of that. And so some of these things really relate to the core issues of your spiritual wellness, your spiritual wellness, your spiritual life, your vitality in Christ, your understanding of the word, how you're receiving Christ on a daily basis. Those all seem to be big issues that still are out there in the world.
Yeah. When someone's in a cross-cultural context, when anyone's in ministry context, I mean, there's always the felt pressure to get things done and to be able to, send an email home or letter home about what's going on. But at the same time, I've seen time after time after time, God has gently reminded me that his greater concern is for me, my well-being, my spiritual life. If they're, even the time and the circumstances and the things that our family went through getting to the field, we're pretty clear indicator that God wanted us in a place of better spiritual health, rather than just like, bam, get us on the field. And I mean,
certainly.
But it's easy to lose sight of that. It's easy to lose sight of our own spiritual health. It's easy to lose sight of who we are as people and how our depth of relationship with God is really that's the well we have to minister from.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If we're not keeping that fresh and Anyway, it's so easy to lose sight in a day-to-day ministry situation.
Yeah, and I think global workers, the pressures are great. They continue to be, I think, for workers on the field, and they get them from all different, cross-cultural workers get pressures from all different sides. It's not, it could be the third world country they're living in. It could be the local church that's putting pressure on them. It could be a family member. It could be themselves. And yet, so what we'll find is that you really have to call people into a slowing down of their life and moving into some rhythms of life that are going to be life-giving as far as our own intimacy with Christ. And I think it's easy, probably in any kind of work that we do, but maybe more so in the work that we, do for the Lord, that we can be, so bound by this product-oriented theology that we miss the importance of our intimacy with Christ. And so our goal is to just try to remind people of that, and to remind it to ourselves, right? So it's easy to forget, even as caregivers, and we can neglect that piece if we're not careful.
So what would you say are some ways that the church and missionary caregivers can be a part of the solution?
It is interesting to see I've used the terminology, the resurgence of the North American church to be involved in the deeper level of care with workers. And we have seen that over the course of the last 10 to 15 years of a desire of the local church in North America to not just write the check and to send the finances, but to actually be engaged in the emotional and the spiritual life of those that they send out. And so I can remember interviewing with the board of directors at Barnabas when we first came in 1994. And that was my first question to the board was, why is there a need for Barnabas? Isn't this the church's responsibility?
Yeah.
And, their response was, well, yeah, I think you're right. They believe that as well. But the church had neglected, I think, the role to care for their workers in the early stages of missions. And so now we see this desire with local churches all across the country who really do want to engage deeply, but they may not know how.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know what to do or the tools. They have it all available to them within the body of Christ. Every gift is necessary for good spiritual and emotional care is right there within the church. And so I think particularly for us, what we're looking for as an organization is how can we strategically partner with local churches to assist them in what they're trying to accomplish. I know our staff members do that on an informal basis, but we're trying to figure out, is there a way to do that? I recently became part of a task force, if you will, with a little group of people we're calling ourselves Missionary Care Catalysts. Mm-hmm. And it's a desire to develop some best practices for local churches in the area of sending, sustaining, and receiving global workers. Okay. And so have developed some of those best practices and are now trying to figure out how can we disseminate that information to local churches around the country. Okay. And of course, we've been able to do that in Barnabas by partnering with a few entities around the country to where we've been able to come alongside and actually provide that care. So the Minnesota Renewal Center in Minneapolis contacted us about 13 years ago or so and said, it seems like there's a need for local churches to have some training and equipping. And so we said, what can we do to help? So we sent personnel up. They offered a little 2 or 3 day conference in their city. And over the last 13 years, we've seen multiple churches in the Twin Cities areas who've been equipped and trained to now essentially take over the care of their workers that are there. And so, that's encouraging. The awareness of missionary care within the local church has really exploded, I think, in the last 10 years within the country. It would be interesting to really kind of look at member care and go, over the last 30 years, has there been some sort of desegregation of care? Have we siloed out so much in ministry that we haven't really come together in a way, especially the North American member care force.
Yeah.
We're fairly, I mean, we partner with lots of different organizations, and we know that that's the future and has to be happening. But churches are looking for it right now.
Yeah.
They're crying out for it. And
Right.
those of us in member care, whatever it is we're in, we have to be looking for those opportunities. If a church is calling out to us, how can we respond with whatever level of expertise that we have to equip and train them to do the work, and then encourage the missionaries that are under our care to turn their gaze towards the church, because it's a new thing for them to feel loved and cared for, perhaps by a local body. And so I don't know that we'll ever be out of a job, but it would be great if we were.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like in America, we definitely were for many, many years living in the age of the specialist. Like, oh, we can't do that. A specialist has to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Trained professional. Oh, I can't do that. I'm not a trained professional. But I'm really intrigued by the resources that you are developing for the local church, and looking forward to maybe some kind of I hate to use the word packaging, but some way to make that available at a local church level to a missions team or missions committee, that they can then have even just some basic tools to together you work through and talk through and say, hey, let's talk about our standards and some basic practices, basic principles, so that when a missionary comes home, we listen to them, we care for them, and we don't unintentionally hurt them by some of the things we do or say, but just try to be more aware of their needs.
Yeah, we offered a training this last year at our pastoral training and member care conference. We have a pre-conference on the beginning of each of those conferences, and we offered a 2-day training to church-based care. So we put together a multidisciplinary team of people, some missions pastors and some member care specialists. We came together and we only had about 16 people sign up for that. But with those 16 people, all right, the membership of those churches was 80,000 people.
Wow.
With 300 missionaries under their care.
Wow.
And so for a small number of people in a 2 or 3 day seminar or whatever, we were able to talk through practices that they could do as a local church, down to the nitty gritty of what do you do when someone is interested in missions, and then how do you foster that passion, and then actually walk with them through the sending, through the field, sustaining them on the field, and then receiving them on their reentry, and talking through some of those dynamics with them. And so those are the kinds of things where, we're looking for opportunities where God might, place us to say, okay, here's a group of people that you could train that could exponentially serve a greater number of people that are being sent out. And Lord willing, then, those 300 or so missionaries that are sent out by those 15 or 16 churches, whatever it was, will sense and feel cared for in this next 12 months, much greater than they ever have before. And they can turn to the church for their help, and it's safe, and it's beneficial, and it's mutual. I mean, that's a biblical concept that we all need to be following.
Right.
Certainly.
I think there's always room for a third party in the caring situation.
Yeah, certainly.
Just because of potential concerns or questions someone might have.
Yeah, and I think that's where the specialists come in. Barnabas, we've got our specialists, and we refer out, and but it is really exciting to see the local church that's actually engaging much, much more in the area of care, and I think that's only going to be beneficial for the greater kingdom as we see things move out in the next 5 to 10 years.
So it's just so fascinating to just hear about all the ways that Barnabas is involved and what you guys are doing, and it's just super encouraging to know that you guys are helping the local church too. And I'm hoping that some of our listeners will want to come to the beach this year. We'll be linking to your website. Hopefully, God willing, we'll be able to actually have it in person, right?
Yeah, for sure. That'd be awesome to be able to do that. Yeah. So,
And
which is
this
great.
Mukapa, I know I personally was part of Mukapa when I was in college,
Okay. Yeah.
and then my years working with the transition
Yeah.
seminar. It's really encouraging to just hear what you guys are doing now and with the realities of our COVID world,
Sure.
and just to hear how God's continuing to use you guys. And
Well,
we'll probably be some of your first signer-uppers for your course when it hits
Right.
That's great. Yeah, we'd love to have you guys be a part of it. And it is, I think you're right too, Steve. The whole idea of working together, the agency, the church, specialty organizations like Barnabas and the ministries that you guys have, all provide incredible opportunities for missionaries to be well cared for. And if we continue to have the mindset that we're all in this together, certainly make a big difference in God's work around the world for us, which is great.
Perry, thank you for your time, and thank you for the ministry of Barnabas. And just from our standpoint, just for you to pass on our gratitude to your workers, and we want them to know that we appreciate them and we're grateful for them. And I'm really excited about how Barnabas is starting to reach internationally, and helping organizations and agencies outside of North America. And I know that's been a burden on your heart for a long time. So I'm encouraged.
Yeah, it has been. And it's exciting to see that that's, beginning to take place more and more. And so we're grateful for God's provision there. So appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you for your time, and bless
you. Bet. All right. God bless you guys. Take care.
That was a great interview with Perry, and I think every time I listen to Perry, the thing that I come away with is their shepherd's heart, and they really, more than anything, want to have that pastoral role in the life of missionaries and mission agencies and now this material they're working on developing in local churches, so the local churches can have that shepherd's role in the life of their missionaries.
Yeah, and I think that key ingredient that they're talking about being rooted in Christ, and that's what it means to shepherd and help people really remain in Christ, despite the pressures of the missionary life and challenges and things that we've talked about in our other podcasts. I just love it that he's saying, this is what people at the core of what a missionary needs is to stay rooted in Christ. And I think that's so vital for all of us, any of us who are walking with Jesus, in order to really live for the Lord and to not.
Well, you can have the most extensive training, you can have the most up-to-date this and up-to-date that, but if you really aren't rooted in Christ, it's just that you think about Psalm 1, and just think about how those trees and that picture of that psalm that, when the storms come, they wither and they die and they fall. And we don't want to see that in the world of cross-cultural workers. We want to see people that are rooted and strong, because we all know that in the ministry and in the arena of cross-cultural ministry, there are a lot of storms that come your way.
Yes. So we hope you are all encouraged by our conversation with Perry, and that you can look at the website. We have it linked. It's barnabas.org. And I pray that you guys would really be blessed.
Well, thank you again for listening to the Innkeepers podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers for kingdom purposes. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, and maybe you were prompted to pass this along to someone you know that will benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy schedules to help us learn more about missionary care.
We also want to thank Tim Downing for the music that he wrote and performed specifically for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can learn more about him and his work at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos and is produced by Tim Cowley of Cowley Visuals. If you have media needs, including film, photography, or audio, you can reach Tim at cowleyvisuals.com.
Our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Givens, Kara's amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website and learn more about the ministry of Sanctuary Inn at sanctuaryinn.org. Thank you again for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.
See you next time.